Okay, we've got a grasp on the client side, and we know what's going down on the server side. But what actually connects the two? We know there's a website address involved, and that allows us to request content. And when we write front-end code, we are writing the content that is getting delivered as a result of that request. And we may also be writing front-end JavaScript that can make new requests from the client. But what else is going on? What else do we need to know about? A lot, actually. The communication between client and server has many important elements that we must have an understanding of as front-end web developers. Let's start with the web address. Every page and resource on the web has an address that indicates where it's located. When a web browser or client makes a request for the address, it is telling an internet service provider, hey, get me content located here. The internet service provider then attempts to go down the path of retrieving content from that location by resolving that address into something it and the network can understand. It does this with DNS. DNS, the domain name system, is the mapping of domain names to server IP addresses. There are a couple of things we need to know about DNS as front-end devs. If we are doing contract or freelance work, we may find ourselves in situations where we are responsible for registering domain names and setting them up for sites we are building. And if we are working at a position in a company, we may be needing to wire up some client-side code to make requests to another domain. When DNS records get configured for a domain name, they get updated in one server location and then get propagated out to other internet service providers over time. Typically, this doesn't take too long, maybe a day or two at most, but it is a factor that comes into play when we go to use our code that we create to make web requests to a domain name. The other thing we need to know about DNS is that there is a local file on our machines that allows us to override DNS settings from our internet connection. This means that we can create our own DNS entries that will tell our machines to go to an IP of our choosing when our client app requests a matching domain name. This is extremely helpful for front-end web development because it allows us to test our site code using full domain names without having to have our code deployed to the actual server that is hosting the code. The things we need to know about DNS as front-end devs are: DNS records need to propagate, and it is possible to change local DNS so you can dev with actual URLs. So that covers addresses and getting the content. But what about the process of the request and multiple requests? What do we need to know there? The biggest thing is web requests are stateless. What is meant by stateless? When a request is made, a response is returned, and both the server and the client have no obligation to have any further communication. And each request and response stands on its own. Web requests are everywhere, not just the initial page request. A link to a style sheet or JavaScript file, an image source attribute, a font, these are all web requests. Now, some of these get cached by browsers after their first response, but they still result in a request at least once. Each web request consists of headers and a body, which could be empty. So all of these requests have at least some payload cost to them. Understanding when, where, and how many web requests to make is an extremely important skill set for front-end web development. We need to have a solid understanding of the request and response lifecycle and the intricacies of them. So areas of focus for learning include understanding the role of DNS, how to configure local DNS, that web requests are stateless, and to really know the request and response architecture. Okay, on deck for the next clip, we will go over the different languages of the web and learn that it is important that we get exposure to different ones.